Do you think evolution is synonymous with layers rendering?
Yeah, I do think that fundamentally is what reality is. I mean, that's kind of the central message of being human is that reality is God's evolution. That what we call reality from the Big Bang up until now, or before, or whatever, I mean, we don't have it all figured out yet, but that this experience that we call reality is the evolution of God. And by evolution, I mean the change and transformation of energy over space and time. That those are necessary ingredients in order for energy to evolve and express itself. And that's what reality is God evolving and experiencing itself through. My version of God is not a transcendent version of God. It is a God that is reality itself. It's not, let there be light, bing, and there's light, and I stand back and say, oh, that was good. Let me separate the waters from the waters and the earth from the waters, and bing, oh, and that was good. And let me separate the day from the night, bing, that was good. No, that's not how it works at all. That's just a nice story. Reality itself is God evolving and changing and experiencing itself. And that is the point, right? That I like to say that reality is God's life.
Yeah.
And so by studying reality, particularly through scientific methodologies, that's where we get accurate and true information about what has been the evolution of the universe, right? Mm-hmm. It's not some cosmology that's based off of some kind of metaphysics, religious worldview. It's by taking observation and doing our best to make sense of what we observe and fit it into what we know. Through scientific methodology, what we know is always changing, versus in religion, you get a dogma of, no, this is true, this is what we know, and then we have to fit the facts to what we know, versus with science, our view is always evolving and always changing, that we are uncovering new areas of reality, new ways of understanding and manipulating reality, and so that is accurate and verifiable information, whereas religions are not based off of accurate and verifiable information for the most part. They're built off of cultural systems of meaning making, and meaning making is different from observation, analysis, and measurement. I like to refer to the human body as a God vehicle, meaning this is something that God gets to experience reality through and move around and do stuff in, right? So it's a vehicle. We create our egos as we develop, from childhood on up. And our ego is what attaches us to our false beliefs and our illusions and our projections and creates us as a victim or as, whatever it is that we're creating ourselves as. Nobody else made my ego. Like nobody went and installed an ego in me, right? That's a natural development of being a human being. But it also means that I did it in the sense that I made choices about how I was going to be and how I was going to think and what I was going to believe. And we pick up a lot of that stuff from our parents, from our culture, from our society, from our socioeconomic status, and all of that. But we still have to adopt that ourselves. We have to make those choices ourselves. We are responsible. We are influenced by people in society outside of us, but we still make our own choices about who we are going to be and how we're going to think of ourselves and what beliefs we're either going to attach ourselves to or not attach ourselves to. We are 100% responsible for our own egos. Keeping in mind that some of us have experienced trauma, sexual trauma, violence, societies in chaos and disorder. So it's not like we all have, we're all growing up in an ideal garden. And so some people have defense mechanisms that are much more deeply built into their egos based on the environment in which they grew up and the experiences they've had, particularly if they've had traumatic experiences, that there's going to be areas of their ego that are far more sensitive. Because it is something that we live with and that we create, it also means we have the ability to undo it. If we become aware of what are the patterns through which I've created my ego and my identity, that I can work around that. I can undo that. I can liberate myself from that. And again, that's going back to the idea of liberation. You can liberate yourself if you do the work on yourself. And if you give yourself permission to be yourself And if you engage in practices through which you can learn about yourself, that you have to know yourself in order to liberate yourself, but that's your responsibility. And that when people look to outside, like either a political figure, this person's going to do everything and fix everything, or a religious figure, this religious figure is going to fix everything, that is taking responsibility from ourselves. Or if we say, well, I'm just a product of my environment. I blame my parents for the way that I am. I blame the religion that I grew up in for the way that I am. That's a displacement of responsibility. Or if you say, well, hey, it's my astrological sign, and that's why I'm this way. Again, recognizing that some people have a lot of trauma and suffering that they might need to work through, so it's harder. And it might seem impossible at times. And there is room for exterior help. There is room for seeing a therapist. There is room for practicing spirituality. There is room for all of this.
For sure. Mushrooms help with that for sure.
Yeah. And there's room for using psychedelics. I think that psychedelics are most effective because they work immediately on our energy. Mm-hmm. That's where we have the most direct route to affecting change within our vehicle. We are beings of energy, is how I like to describe what we are. And therefore, if we have tools that allow us to perceive and experience our energy in different ways and process it in different ways, and that's where psychedelics come in. And it's kind of like, same thing as like if your car breaks down, you don't go to a guru or a shaman or a priest to fix your car. That'd be kind of bizarre. You go to a mechanic to fix your car, because they're the ones who's actually going to get in there and fix your car. Mm-hmm. And psychedelics tend to work that way when used consciously, that it helps fix and tune up our vehicle by working at an energetic level, an immediate energetic level. DMT and tryptamines in particular seem to play an important role in mammalian evolution, in that we use these as neurotransmitters, and that our bodies always have trace amounts of both DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. And that there's not just places where DMT binds to our nervous system. It's not just in our brains, but actually it's all throughout our body that these tryptamines can bind onto our nerve endings and therefore influence the flow of energy within our vehicle. So that, at the most basic level, we are kind of these tryptamine beings, that we're running off of tryptamines like serotonin, melatonin. We're producing DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, and that these things are functioning in a way that alters consciousness, in a way that DMT is not functioning in plants, for example. In plants, DMT seems to be more of a pesticide. In other words, plants aren't using DMT to think. We are using DMT to think. And we always have at least low levels of DMT in our body. And so it's through the neurotransmitters that we're able to perceive and experience reality at all. And in that sense, all perception of reality is a drug trip of one kind or another, whether it's serotonin or DMT or melatonin. This is how our bodies are functioning. This is what is regulating consciousness. And that with DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, that the brain actually seems to metaphorically be hungry for these, and that it very quickly absorbs it, crosses the blood-brain barrier. They have to go through all different kinds of transformations before they're allowed to cross the blood-brain barrier. But that's not with DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. Our brains just say, yep, I want that one. It seems to be actually very healthy for us in that sense, that our body has a very easy time processing these molecules, that they're very normal and natural. In terms of mammalian evolution, DMT, and 5-MeO-DMT, it's something that's found in all mammals, right? And there aren't other categories of life forms, like there is DMT and 5-MeO-DMT in some plants, not in every plant. And reptiles, also, I don't believe that they have DMT or 5-MeO in them. But mammals, every single mammal on the planet produces DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, at least in trace amounts, and that most likely these are correlated also with people's spiritual experiences and visionary states of consciousness, which has been fundamental to the development of human cultures and societies. It's our spirituality and our sense of being is a product of our egos. And so that these experiences are what formed early human societies and what inspired people to make paintings on cave walls and start creating symbols and having shared meaning and shared stories and shared values. So it's just an integral part of our evolution. It's a very important part of who we are, that these tryptamines, that they exist inside us, and that we can produce more of them in altered states of consciousness, and that we can consume them from plants and fungi that exist out there in nature and alter our consciousness. And that the earliest human societies were all shamanic in nature. And at the core of most religions, we find some kind of mystical or spiritual or visionary experience around which the religion develops. So that this is part of what makes us who we are as biological beings. So it's very important for us. Mushrooms, ayahuasca, DMT, 5-MeO, DMT, they actually help to grow neurons in the brain. They can potentially help deal with anxiety, depression, might even be a viable treatment for things like Alzheimer's and dementia and neurodegeneration. These chemicals are actually, again, they're very healthy for our bodies, that they process them in a very healthy way. So they're ultimately good for us.
What do you think about Neuralink?
My view is that science and technology is part of the evolution of consciousness in reality. And that a lot of people want to make a distinction between the natural world and the technological world and say that these are fundamentally distinct and that one is good and the other is bad. There's lots of people that think that, oh, this idea of transhumanism or posthumanism, where we're more integrated with digital technology, is just inherently a bad thing and stripping us of our humanity. But I actually tend to view it as kind of the inevitable evolution of life. That, look, as soon as you get a being that's smart enough and has hands so it can actually disassemble reality and reassemble reality, and we have the cognitive tools that allow us to develop scientific understanding, I think once you get an animal with that capacity, technology is inevitable, and that therefore it is an extension and outgrowth of the evolution of the natural world. So technology is actually a part of the natural world. I think it's only natural that there will be some kind of integration with technology. I don't see that as something necessarily frightening or bad. I know there's a lot of concerns about privacy and things like that, but I mean, look, we are interfacing through technology right now. We are already highly integrated with technology. If it weren't for technology, we would not be having this conversation. So it's thanks to technology that this is even possible. And through information technology, we have an explosion of the sharing of ideas and information. It is the integration of technology with biological life that will eventually make it possible for us to actually be an interplanetary species. But I think, without technology, I mean, that's not going to happen. So I do think that it's a natural outgrowth. It's one of the central themes of my novel, The Solandarian Game, is that the idea that technology and actually the development of artificial intelligence is the evolution of reality. It's the evolution of the consciousness of God.
It's awesome.
Yes, I don't see them as being inherently conflicting in any way. One of the things that I love about science and technology is that you don't have to believe in it. It works because it works. So it's not about belief systems. This is about accurate and true information about the way that reality works. So for me, that makes it very exciting.